Chapter 82, The Thaw. The Thaw. The next day found the weather fine and bright, especially for the season, the sky overhead as blue and clear as an ocean. In fact, Ajantis and the others of the militia had left for the fort with the dawn, but neither this, nor Frith's resounding insistences that she was well enough to travel would persuade the druid of setting out back to the city. The weather was still harsh and liable to change, and Jahara did not want the girl going anywhere until she was much more healed. And, for once, it looked as though Fritha was to be outvoted, Anomen, Ari and even Minsk all lending their voices in support of the druid's decision. Not that Fritha was about to let these overwhelming odds put her off trying.
But, Jahara, seriously, we can leave,
the girl pressed, stalking the woman across the backyard, Fritha having spent the last quarter hour pleading with the druid as she had followed her about the yard hunting out eggs from Garen's few hens.
I'll be fine. I mean, think about it, I almost fought a dragon as I am now. As I am well aware, and much against my better judgment too. But think of Garen,
Fritha continued, changing tack with the speed of one well used to arguing to get her way.
The longer we stay here, the more of his winter supplies are eroded, his generosity far outstrips his means.
The way Jahara was smiling showed Fritha that she already had that covered though, the druid looking rather pleased with herself.
Indeed, and so that is why Minsk, Valigar and I are going out with Garen and his son to hunt deer in the western forests. It would usually be a difficult kill to make and carry back with only the two of them, but together we should be able to get enough meat to last them the whole winter. We will be gone overnight.
Fritha stopped at the back door, her stomach suddenly empty as she watched the woman carefully set down her dish to remove her boots, the treasure of eggs rolling precariously within.
So, you're not only making me stay, but you're all going off and leaving me too. You will not be alone. Ari, Herr Dallas and Anomen are staying here too. Play it nursemaid. I hate this. I just want to get back to the city.
Jahara clucked her tongue, gathering up the dish with a smile.
Ah, listen to you sulk, are you 20 or 12? I'm sick of trying my best and getting nowhere.
For the first time in their argument, Jahara looked sympathetic. Unfortunately, it was too late.
Fritha. Oh, do what you will,
the girl snapped, kicking off her own boots and pushing past her.
I don't care.
Fritha stormed through the main room and into Garen's bedroom to slam the door behind her. The floor was littered with their packs, her group and the militia having spent the night camped in there in the main room, and she picked her way over to her own bag, still resting under the window where she had slept the night, the girl untying her bedroll to curl upon it, her cloak hood pulled up and hiding her from the world. Jahara didn't understand, none of them did. This trick of fur crags was just another setback, another cruel blow that took them right back to their beginnings, and Fritha was so desperate to get back to city and continue pushing forward to raise this last bit of coin, because it felt as though if she stopped for too long now, she would just never manage to continue. Anomen sat in the kitchen, his armor stripped down and set out on the table before him as he checked and cleaned each piece. He had heard their argument earlier and Fritha had not come out to see the others off, Jahara going in Garen's room alone and merely returning with her own, Valigar and Minsk's bags not long afterwards. He could understand the girl's frustration. They were to return to the city not ready to pay the Shadow Thieves' fee and finally secure her friend's release, but little better off than when they had left it. Ari and Herr Dallas had spent the rest of the day since the others left, sat by the fire together in the main room talking softly, and Anomen waited in the kitchen until the sun had passed over the small cabin and was on its slow descent in the west, before he ventured into the bedroom they had all been sharing. Fritha was laid upon her bedding with her back to the door, though she was not asleep, her hands playing with something at her neck. He toyed briefly with the idea of quietly backing out again, though she sat at the groan of the door, turning to greet him with a half-smile.
"So, you did not wish to go with them then?"
she confirmed as he took a seat on the floor behind her, a hand planted at her side and taking his weight as he leaned forward to see her face.
"I'm sure they would have welcomed your skills, woodsman, or not. Imagine the glory of slaying the mighty heart."
ARandomAudiobookAppeared watched her theatrics with narrowed eyes and a slight smile.
"Perhaps so, but I would have spent the entirety worrying for your well-being. I know Ari and Herr Dallas would have been with you, and you yourself are hardly incapable, but I would prefer to be here all the same. I wonder, then, what quest of glory it will take to draw you from my side, if not that? Rescuing a stuck cat perhaps? Helping a merchant fix his cartwheel?" "Fritha,"
he warned.
"I'm just wondering,"
she whined defensively, though he could still see the sly smile that lingered behind it, the girl turning her attentions to the hand that almost encircled her, pale fingers reaching forward to play with the large square signet ring on his thumb, the 3 crossed arrows of Haustelren carved upon the face.
"I have not noticed this before." "No, it is the seal of my house. Both my sister and I had one, but I would not wear mine after I left for the seminary. My mother scolded me about it more than once. She said that it was a sign of my heritage, that I could be proud of my family even if I was not on good terms with my father. I did not realize at the time, but she was right. They are all dead on my father's side, but I believe I've some relatives still living on my mother's. I remember her receiving letters from her brother when I was younger, and he and their mother visited Athkatla just after Moira was born, though I do not think my grandmother still lives. I never really thought of them before, but perhaps, when all this is over, I will make efforts to reacquaint myself with them."
ARandomAudiobookAppeared watched her, Fritha still playing with the ring, twisting it back and forth on his finger, a slight frown of concentration on her face. He wanted to ask her if she would come with him, but he said nothing. He had known when they had begun this, that it was to be fleeting, that she would likely leave once Mon was back, and he had promised himself he would accept things for however long they lasted and then let her go.
"I am sure your mother would be pleased you are wearing it now,"
she murmured, glancing up with a sudden smile.
"Come on, let's see what those two are up to."
But it turned out that those two were locked in a passionate clinch, the pair curled within the same armchair, kissing, and so enthusiastically, they had not even heard the door open. Fritha sighed.
"Gods, I wish I was drunk."
ARandomAudiobookAppeared nodded gravely.
"I break it up, you two,"
Fritha continued brusquely, the pair springing apart as she marched past them on her way to the kitchen.
"I'm not enduring an evening of this."
Ari gave the man she was sat upon a grin, briefly touching her lips to his in one last kiss before she had hopped up, following Fritha into the kitchen, the girl stepping from the larder with a large joint of cured meat.
"We should make a start on supper. Jahara said she set aside some pork, but it will need to boil a while to take out most of the salt, or it will be inedible." "ARandomAudiobookAppeared,"
Fritha continued with a tut, her frown falling on the kitchen table which was still covered in row upon row of his neatly set out gear.
"I'll just clear that away,"
he muttered, stooping for his bag.
"And don't leave your books like that,"
she scolded quite seriously, waving a finger at his journal which he had left open and face down upon the table.
"You'll ruin the spine."
Herr Dallas shot the knight a dark look as Fritha turned her attention to the fireplace.
Perhaps something terrible has happened to our druid, the raven seems to be channeling her as we speak." "I heard that. Has someone been out to feed Toffee?"
Fritha continued, dropping the joint into the large pot Ari had hurriedly fetched down from the shelf above the range.
Yes, my raven,"
Herr Dallas agreed, eager to appease.
"And he is quite well, he said to give you his regards.
Frithla laughed lightly, catching up the bucket to head out for some water, a no-man taking it from her a second later and leaving her to the less arduous task of digging their tea leaves from his pack. And it made for quite a nice afternoon. All sat about the kitchen table drinking tea and slowly preparing the vegetables in the fading light, as the meat simmered over the fire. Anoman and Frithla were talking quietly over the other side of the table, the man seemingly asking her where she had learned to cook as she chopped carrots at a furious speed. Ari smiled, checking on the progress of the man next to her. She and Herr Dallas playfully racing each other as they peeled and sliced the few sprouting potatoes Frithla had fetched from the larder, giggling and nudging each other as they worked. And from the look of things, Herr Dallas was winning, though only just.
Herr Dallas, that's cheating.
Ari laughed as he threw his potato into the pot between them, peeled but still quite whole, and caught up the last to ensure his triumph.
Ah, come now, Ari, all's fair. And a kiss for the victor, I think.
He leaned in, the beginning of it feeling awkward as Ari fought against a smile.
Ah, gods, must you?
Sighed Frithla, wincing into her carrots.
My stomach feels bad enough as it is.
Herr Dallas chuckled. Eventually, he had been in no hurry for them to part.
My raven, so cold, where is your sense of romance? Ha! Romance, indeed.
The girl snorted.
Do you know what romance is? All those feelings and butterflies? It's just nature's way of making intensely embarrassing situations bearable. Otherwise, it's just your tongue in someone else's mouth. Frithla!
Cried Ari and Anoman in unison, Herr Dallas laughing wildly.
Ah, my raven, your view of the world never ceases to amuse. But what about your poor knight? I bet he is not averse to a bit of kissing.
Anoman spluttered into his leeks, Frithla offering casually,
perhaps not, though I think he'd have quite a bit to say against me trying to eat his face. Here, Ari dear, have a carrot if you're that hungry. Oh, Frithla,
the elf sighed, scarlet even as she laughed, the man at her side catching up the carrot Frithla had just thrown across to bite off the end with good-humoured relish. The water the meat was boiling in had to be changed 3 times, in the end, to take out most of the salt, Anoman helping Frithla to tip the last lot into the backyard, the billowing steam a dazzling cloud of gold dust in the newly lit lamps. And from there, they added the vegetables before setting it all back over the fire for one last boil, the men given the task of setting out the dishes and cups, while Frithla and Ari sorted through the group's laundry with plans to wash it tomorrow if the weather held. Their meal served and eaten, they cleared the dishes to spend the rest of the evening sat in the warm kitchen playing cards, that was, until Frithla began to wilt, and Anoman and Ari insisted she retire. Frithla looked as though she would have argued, too, had she the energy for it, the girl hiding behind her sleeve for another wide yawn.
You're all ganging up on me, it's just because I'm winning. Come now, Frithla,
pressed Anoman, ever the voice of reason.
You lost a lot of blood, it is best not overexert yourself.
Herr Dallas grinned.
Raven, now off you go to bed, the hound will be through in a moment to tuck you in.
Frithla stuck her tongue out at him, Anoman shaking his head with a tired amusement as he corrected,
actually, I shall come through now. I want to change your bandages. Again.
The girl cried, making for the door.
Why? I'm not bleeding anymore. No, but you will need more salve upon the wound, Jahara left me with strict instructions. Well, I won't tell her, if you won't.
The door swung shut on Anoman's reply, Ari reaching forward to gather up the cards, Herr Dallas shifting closer to rest his chin on her shoulder.
And how are you, sweet Ari? Ready for your bed? Perhaps I should check your bandages.
She squealed as 2 hands clamped about her waist, his tickling only made worse by her squirming as he hauled her onto his lap.
"Oh, Herr Dallas,"
she lamented, glancing back over her shoulder to find the kitchen floor decorated with Jahara's talus deck.
"Look at what you made me do. I care not for cards,"
he laughed, looking more than pleased with himself as he jogged her. Ari pouted, though it could not hide her smile.
"You cared well enough when you were beating us all at hearts. It's a shame what happened here, isn't it?"
She sighed, shifting so she was sat across his lap, an arm about his shoulders to steady herself.
"With those men dead and Furkrag dragging us all the way here just so he can torment Fritha's dead father. At this rate, I wonder if we will have enough coin by the spring."
Herr Dallas shrugged.
"If that is how long it takes, then so be it. I thought you were wanting to get back to Sigil. The cage can wait a little while longer, it is not going anywhere."
Ari smiled, settling down to nestle into his shoulder.
"Tell me about Sigil."
He chuckled, she could feel the rumble of it in his chest.
"I've told you many a tale of Sigil." "No, you've told me stories set in Sigil, not about the city though. Tell me what it's like." "Why, Ari? You will see it soon enough." "Yes, I will see it with my eyes, I want to see it with yours."
She heard him smile, his hand moving lower to stroke the small of her back.
"Very well, my love. Where to begin? Sigil sits atop a spire, the hub of the Great Wheel.
Fritha drew a deep breath and slowly opened her eyes, the room bright with the dawn, the window above her without curtains and bathing the room in a soft white light. She stretched blissfully, the twinge in her stomach making her instantly regret it, the slight pain rather spoiling what had so far been a pleasantly gentle awakening. On the floor over the other side of the bed, 2 pairs of legs could be seen poking out from behind the frame, still cocooned in blankets, and Fritha did not need to see the rest of them to confirm Ari and Herr Dallas were still asleep. And, as for Anomen, she glanced over to the pile of empty bedding just before the chest of drawers. He was up already, it seemed. She lay in her bedding a few moments more, seeing if he was to make a reappearance, but he did not, and her own boredom soon won out over her comfort, Fritha just pulling a tunic over the slip and trousers she had slept in and padding through to the kitchen. The room was icy despite the fire that was licking about the hearth, the back door thrown wide to the dawn, and there he was in the center of the yard, pink-faced from cold and effort, knelt over Garen's large washtub, suds all up his arms and tunic, and spotted in his hair as he worked through the laundry she and Ari had sorted out the night before. He glanced up at the creak of the door.
"Oh, good morning, Fritha."
There was nothing for it, Fritha burst out laughing.
"Gods, look at the state of you."
Anomen laughed, as well, trying to brush the bubbles from his hair with his forearm.
"I had hoped to be finished before you awoke."
Fritha wrapped her arms about herself as a gust of wind howled down the valley, sending a blizzard of suds whipping across the yard.
"I can see why. Oral's breath, aren't you cold?"
The knight grinned.
"Not a bit, summer came in your smile." "Oh ho, very smooth, Herr Dallas will be coming to you for tips soon." "I await the day. Are they awake yet?" "No, still sleeping, it was Ari's snoring that woke me, actually." "Fritha, go back inside, you'll get cold."
Anomen ordered, Fritha suddenly flapping her way across to him in muddy boots that were far too big and the worn old coat Garen kept by the back door.
"I thought it was summer? Here.
She smiled, dipping a hand into the tub and feeling the heat instantly suffuse through the water.
There, at least our hands will be warm.
After a while, Anoman gave up on trying to convince her to return to the house, and they finished the washing together, Frithha heating another batch of water with but a look to rinse the clothes, the pair busy wringing them out ready to hang upon the rope Garin had strung between two of the sheds, when Ari and Herdalis finally rose.
Goodness, you two are full of industry,
called Ari from the back door.
I've just put some tea over the fire, would you like some?
Yes, please, Frithha called back for both of them.
Here, lower your end, Anoman,
she continued, the girl laughing as water ran down the twisted rope of saffron linen that was Ari's dress to cascade over her arms, Frithha trying to dance out of the way without letting go.
It's on an angle and I'm getting wet.
It was not long before the smell of cooking was drifting about the yard. Ari and Herdalis making a start on the breakfast, well, mostly Ari. Herdalis was lending moral support. Frithha and Anoman finished hanging up the washing, the assortment of clothes flapping in the brisk wind. The last of those colored banners hung just in time to greet their friend's triumphant return, Garin, Lewis, and their own companions marching down the valley, two large deer slung between them. And the rest of the day was spent in similar activity. Valigar and Jahara helping Garin skin and joint the beasts, while Minsk and Anoman were tasked with gathering the wood and building up the pyre in the smoke hut ready to cure the meat. Frithha had been sent back to the house as soon as Jahara had arrived, she and Ari baking a few days' worth of bread and taking it in turns to churn some of the milk Lewis had brought from the barn into butter. It was a pleasant day of simple chores, and Frithha could see by the end of it why Garin may have been reluctant to resume his title as lord of that place. It was the next day when Frithha was given her examination by Jahara and finally deemed well enough to travel, and they left the holding at mid-morning, taking with them a good supply of the venison they had helped Garin catch, as well as some unleavened bread that Ari had baked, and with that and the rations they had left over, they would have had enough to see them all the way back to city, if they made good time. A stipulation, of course, that had ensured only one thing, snow. 2 days from the wind spears it began, light at first, just frosting the rocky hills with a picturesque dusting of white. But by the afternoon, it was much steadier, the winds whipping it into fitful blizzards, and, worst of all, it was laying. That was their second day of snow, and they were still another 3 from the city. Jahara was used to living in the wilds, but last night was not an experience she ever wished to repeat. A day traveling in the snow had left everything soaked through with meltwater, and everyone colder for it, the group unable to find wood for more than a few hours of fire, and they settled down after a meal of cold rations and lukewarm tea, only to be woken in the morning by the steady drip of condensation from the inside of their tents. Jahara was just hoping that the relative warmth and shelter of the lowland forests they were to reach that evening would mean they would not have to suffer the same that night. And so she was at their head with Minsk, setting a pace east she would not have normally attempted in those conditions, spurred on by the knowledge they had only rations enough for 8 days at the most, and she could just imagine everyone's mood in those last few days, if they were forced to walk through that weather on half-empty stomachs. Not that tempers were much better then. Valigar was even more taciturn than usual, Jahara herself biting her tongue more than once, and this last day had found Ari whining about the weather constantly, as though Oral would finally get sick of hearing about it, and give up. Even the sanguine Frithha was snapping more than usual, though, to be fair, she had been in an odd mood since they had left the holding, and Jahara considered that perhaps the snow was the least of her worries. To her credit, the girl was trying to keep most of it to herself though, hood up and head down, Anoman inviting the worst of her temper in his vain attempts to cheer her, seemingly no amount of advice to the contrary from she or Ari able to quell in him the overwhelming desire to help, however clearly unwanted the attention was.
"By Berver, when will it end?"
cried the elf miserably for what had to be the 100th time that day, the air about them suddenly a flurry of white flakes as it began to snow again.
It already feels like we've been tramping through this snow forever. Come now, sweet Airy,
soothed Hairdalis.
We will be under cover of the trees by the evening. We'd be only a day from the city now, if you had all agreed to leave when I wanted,
Frithla reminded with a good deal of pleasure, the girl using spite to keep her warm. She clearly hadn't forgiven them all for outvoting her.
Oh, Frithla, don't,
moaned Airy. Valigar sighed tersely, shaking the snow from his hood as it caught on the laden branches above him.
We are all tired of the weather, Airy, and it is not made any more bearable by your complaints. My hound,
reproached Hairdalis with a frown. His argument hardly helped as the elf at his side whined piteously.
You can say so, the snow is barely up to your calves, I'm the shortest of us all.
Frithla was all too happy to correct her.
You're not, Toffee is, and you don't hear him complaining, do you? What's that, Toffee?
She asked, cocking her head to better hear the pony she led.
You like the snow? You wish it would snow forever and ever. Frithla,
snapped Airy. Jaehaera sighed.
Frithla, stop being a torment, Airy, stop whining.
Frithla muttered something under her breath that Jaehaera expected was not complimentary.
Do not think I cannot, halt.
The druid snapped, cutting off her own rebuke.
We are approached.
Nothing in her words had indicated hostility, but everyone had drawn their weapons all the same. They had all been there before. A party of 10 men and women stepped from the snow-covered gorse before them. Frithla retreated a step, physically jumping as she backed into a gnomon, the man slowly taking down his shield as he laid a reassuring hand upon her shoulder. Jaehaera let her eyes scan the group, recognizing the young mage who had been part of Riviana's party, before her attention was drawn back to their leader, a rugged half-elf with an untidy shock of dark brown hair.
Stand down your weapons, we are not here to fight.
No one moved, Valigar voicing coolly,
You'll forgive us, but we have had many a battle begin with promises of negotiation.
An uncomfortable glance between the Harpers, their leader continuing stalwartly,
We have been sent by the seniors, Jaehaera. We come to tell you the bounty has been rescinded and the charges against you dropped.
Jaehaera could hardly believe it, the plain, matter-of-fact way he just stood there and announced her pardon, as though nothing had happened.
What? Why, after all this time? We investigated and found there were discrepancies in the testimony of the sage, Ramas. He painted a picture of you both that was at odds with other reports we were later given.
He glanced briefly to the young mage at his side, but said no more. Jaehaera felt an anger, suppressed before by her guilt, slowly building within her.
And all the while we were hunted, Harper was turned against Harper, I was forced to kill my fellows.
The leader shifted, his feet betraying an otherwise composed countenance.
Understand, we had to be sure. We know of the situation, that the one you travel with is of the children and we do not care. Galvary and Derman acted alone, believing they could earn the senior's favor by apprehending an enemy of Faerun. But their will was not that of the Harpers, and we are confident of your friend's innocence. Is that so?
Spat Jaehaera bitterly.
And if we had fallen and Frithla had been delivered to you, you and the seniors would have tested her again and demanded her release.
An uncomfortable silence answered her. Jaehaera nodded slowly.
I thought as much. I do not know who you are anymore, who any of you are. Perhaps it is I who have changed, but wherever the difference lies, it is there.
Their dark-haired leader looked grave.
You would turn your back on the Harpers.
Jaehaera merely shrugged.
You may paint it that way if you wish, but I feel it is the Harpers who have turned their back on me. Farewell.
She moved forward, the harpers parting before her, and in silence her companions followed. The afternoon seemed very quiet from then on, no one comfortable speaking over a whisper. They reached the cover of the forests an hour or so later, but their hopes the lower lands had been spared. The snow had been in vain, a thick blanket laying about the trunks in crisp white drifts, covering trees, roots and rocks alike. They walked little further, and the dusk found them setting up what camp they could in a close grouping of firs, where the weave of branches above had spared the ground from the worst of the snows. Jahara left the camp as soon as the tents were pitched, wading out far enough away so she could no longer hear the others. The woman just stood staring out into the dark forest, the snow-covered ground looking grey and ethereal in the twilight.
Jahara.
The woman glanced back to find Fritha stood a few paces behind her, hood down and a crown of snow slowly building on her head.
How long have you been there? Don't know, a little while,
she shrugged, shaking the snow from her curls to leave them beaded, here and there, with meltwater.
Are you coming back to camp?
She continued, stepping closer to her.
Aries whinging again. It wouldn't be so bad, but now Toffee has decided to join her. This pack's heavy. Why do you have to bring so much stuff? Why do you all get tents and I have to sleep outside?
Jahara smiled wryly.
Do you never tire of playing the fool? Haven't yet.
The druid sighed, turning back to the forest before her.
16 years this autumn I would have been a harper, longer even than I was with dear Khalid. A life of service, many good friends, all lost, all ruined by those men.
She shook her head, the bitterness of her tone but a taste of what rested in her heart.
I trusted them. They believed what they were doing was right,
offered Fritha quietly. Jahara whirled back to her, the lump in her throat distorting her cry.
Well, they were wrong. Oh Jahara, please don't get upset, I'm really rubbish at comforting people,
Fritha cried, a hand rubbing her back as Jahara dropped her face into her hands.
Do not worry,
the woman sighed eventually, wiping away the last few tears to push her hands up through her hair, letting one arm land about the shorter girl's shoulders.
The Harpers, they were a part of me and yet separate, as well, like an old friend. But it has been dying for so long now, perhaps it is better off out of its misery. At least, you are safe now.
She added with a smile, gently ruffling her damp hair. Fritha sighed, staring out into the dark forest as she had been.
Doesn't feel like we won though, just feels like we finally finished losing. You have been feeling similarly of late?
Asked Jahara. They may as well get both of their troubles out in the open while they were there.
Your mood would certainly indicate it.
The girl nodded.
I am sorry. I am finding it hard, leaving the wind spears, knowing I must return to the city and trials I had thought finally over. I am trying to spare you all my temper though it seems only poor Anoman is foolish enough to keep tempting it.
She raised her face, letting the snow flutter down to frost her hair and eyelashes.
It will always be like this, won't it? The moments of happiness just brief sparks in the perpetual shadow of life. Ah, let's sing a song.
She sighed, somewhere between wistful and despairing.
Don't you ever feel like that? That you just have too much emotion in you, and you just need a song to get it all out.
And she turned to lead the way back to the others, her voice raised in melancholy refrain.
Oh, fall yes no of winter bleak, and come ye ice and cold, we've fire to keep our bodies thawed and friends to warm the soul.
The snows gave way to rain on the fourth day, and they arrived back in Athkatla in a fine drizzle that had begun 3 days ago and not ceased once. It seemed somehow appropriate. Anoman didn't think there had been a time before, when the group's spirits had been so low. Their return from the wind spears made bearing not the last of their coin, but just a little more blood on their hands. Their pony already safely installed in the local stables, they had trudged the rest of the way through the slums under heavy packs, the streets a mire of grit and water. Anoman glanced up, hardly feeling the rain that speckled his cheeks, so cold as his face was, his eyes gazing up at that plain building of old brick and peeling woodwork as those before him bustled inside. He had never been so happy to see the coronet in his life. Bernard welcomed them with his usual cheer, the man shouting that he would send the maid up with warmed ale as they trailed past him for the stairs. Anoman dropped his pack under the window, a maid arriving to light the fire while he moved behind the screen quickly wash and dry himself as best he could at the washstand, before he changed into his only set of clean, albeit damp, clothes and pulled on his boots once more, his drenched cloak left steaming before the newly lit fire as he grabbed up his coat. She was in her usual room, the one opposite his. Hendak had refused to rent their rooms to anyone else since he had taken ownership of the coronet, and Anoman barely had to take a pace from his own door to be stood outside hers, the man raising a hand to knock even as he called, "Fritha!" There was no answer, Anoman opening the door to find her curled on the bed, still fully clothed, long tendrils of damp hair snaking out across the quilt, her cloak and bag the only things she had seen fit to remove, a sodden heap at the foot of the frame. He sighed gently, stepping over the threshold to gently tap the heel of her boot.
"Come, Fritha, you cannot go to sleep like that. Watch me,"
she murmured into the blankets.
"At least remove your boots." "Gods, Anoman!"
she cried, snapping into a sitting position to pull them roughly off and throw them one after the other.
"There! Are you happy now?"
Anoman locked his jaw, swallowing a retort, Fritha's regret obvious as she shook her head.
"I'm sorry, Anoman, I'm just tired." "Get some sleep then,"
he soothed, sinking onto the edge of the bed to pat her now bare foot.
"I just came to tell you I am heading out again. I must go to explain matters at the order." "Oh, I should come with you." No, you rest, dearest, it will be fine."
She nodded wordlessly, dropping her forehead to press it briefly into his shoulder in a show of modest affection, the man rising as she drew back and he was stood in the hall once more, just about to close her door as he heard the cry.
"Lady patron!"
A roar from the room behind him.
"Oh gods! Tell him I'm dead!"
Anoman sighed, turning to send Mek a very stern look.
"You are not to upset her, you understand?"
Mek grinned.
"Course, Lord, whatever you say."
Anoman shook his head and held the door open for the boy, the sigh on the other side deep and weary as he went to close it behind him.
"Oh, Mek, my lamb, what now?" "So where have you been this time then, m'lady?"
chirruped Mek, the boy seemingly oblivious to the rain and her mood, every fourth step a jog as he fought to keep up with her brisk march through the wet streets.
"We ain't seen you at the theatre for nigh on a fortnight." "We've been to the Wind Spears."
"The Wind Spear Ills?
That's miles away." "I know, we walked it."
Mek laughed.
"I hope you got something good for it, then."
Fritha sighed, feeling as bleak as the glary grey sky above her.
"No, we got nothing for it."
Mek was frowning, staring up at her through a rain-slick fringe. "Why do you do this, m'lady? I know you're an adventurer and all, but you must
have enough coin to last you the winter by now. Wouldn't you rather just stay in the city and leave your adventuring for the warmer months?" "Oh, Mek,"
she laughed weakly,
"I would like nothing more. I don't quite know what tales Higolds has been feeding you about adventurers and their unquenchable thirst for glory or fame or whatever it is they go wandering about the wilderness for, but I'm not an adventurer, Mech, I'm a mercenary in all but name, and all I do is for plain honest coin.
All this just for gold. But why, m'lady? You never buy anything, you're even still staying in the coronet when anyone else would
have moved out to better digs by now.
Frithia considered the boy with a half-smile.
You're an astute young man, aren't you, Mech? The reason for that is I am saving up for something quite special. You see, 4 long months ago, my best friend in Altoriel was taken and imprisoned by the cowled wizards for something she did not do. Now the wizards refuse to release her, but they are not the only power in this city, and the shadow thieves have offered to retrieve her for me, for a modest fee, of course. I know, worthy of the stage, isn't it?
She quipped at his look of boyish awe.
As for the wind spears, we were promised 7,000 gold to go and rout some bandits, only when we arrived we discovered there were no bandits, no coin, it was all just a trick by someone who had a grudge against my dead father. And what did you do? Do.
Frithia gave a great laugh of near-hysterical despair, only for it all to dissipate as she sighed.
Mech, I just walked all the way back here, and now I'm coming to check on you lot, because that is all I can do.
Anoman drew a breath of cool damp air, for the first time in his life glad to be outside the order's walls and walking his way back through the slums. The rain had finally eased off and the weather was quite warm for it, the heavy clouds that still choked the sky above blanketing in the day's heat. His meeting had not been too bad, especially when compared with the last audience he had had with the prelate. Anoman had been relieved to find the order bore no grudges for the death of Sir Islin, or the men he had led, Wes Allen merely listening to his account, before informing him that he had already heard a report detailing the same by Sir Ajantis, who had commended both him and his group as good people who had done all they could to avert, and afterwards lessen the tragedy. Anoman nodded to the guard as he passed, at last pushing open the door to find the coronet teeming with its usual crowd of patrons in the early evening rush. His own group were gathered about a table in the far back, near to one of the fireplaces. Jahara, Valigar, Minsk, and Frithia sat sharing tea and talk, though some more readily than others. He noticed Frithia resting her head upon her hand as she swirled the tea leaves in her cup, though she did glance up at his approach.
"Ah, Anoman, you are returned,"
greeted Jahara, the woman pouring him some tea as he took the seat next to Frithia.
"How was the order?" "As well as could be expected. But they do not hold us responsible and have already had news from Sir Ajantis as to the true enemies in this, so that eased the meeting somewhat." "Who says that Dragon had earned their ire?"
Much nodding followed this, Frithia dropping her attention back to her cup.
"So Frithia,"
Anoman continued,
"did Mech have some great disaster to report?"
The girl shrugged, not lifting her eyes from the drifting tea leaves as she muttered,
"No, Higold just wanted to talk about some troops who've approached him asking to use the theatre. He needed some decisions on our rates and how long we want our own season to run."
Anoman frowned, nothing pressing, just as he had suspected. But for all that, she seemed rather upset by the trip.
"Did something else happen? You seem—" "I'm fine,"
she interrupted curtly,
"thank you."
Anoman glanced back to a table of dark looks, Jahara imperceptibly shaking her head at him. Anoman sighed and changed the subject.
"So, where are Ari and Herdalis? Have they retired already?" "No, they went to visit the circus," answered Jahara, adding with a snort, "and Herdalis a little more reluctantly than Ari, it would seem."
Valigar laughed his agreement.
"Indeed. Though he made no outward sign, some might have said he was feeling a touch awkward about meeting them all again, since his last visit saw him carried out of the tent. "They won't care,"
murmured Fritha.
"he didn't do anything terrible." "No, no,"
agreed Minsk,
just laughed and sang, all in the spirit of the eve.
It seemed no one could find a reply to that, an uneasy silence falling over the table, the bang of the door a welcome interruption when, moments later, Ari and Herr Dallas piled through.
"Little Ari,"
greeted Minsk as the pair arrived,
"Boo says you look to be full of excitement."
That was an understatement, the girl pink and almost breathless as she cried,
"You'll never guess, the trial of ARandomAudiobookAppeared has begun."
The table exploded in excited, and some might have said, relieved chatter.
"When did that happen?"
asked Jahara.
"2 days ago. They are holding it over at the council buildings. A public trial, no less, that any free citizen may sit in on. Unheard of for a noble defendant, it has been packed both days." "'Tis more popular than your playhouse, my raven,"
laughed Herr Dallas. Fritha nodded and forced a weak smile. A no-man watched her with a tired frown.
"You knew, did you not?"
She shrugged despondently.
"Samuel mentioned something, though he had no details." "Well, fortunately for us, Quail is well lamed,"
continued Herr Dallas eagerly,
"and it does not look good for Isia. The prosecution apparently has a very strong case. The defense have already put forward a request for exile should he be found guilty, but the prosecution have made motions to have him publicly hung. Though that will likely be reduced to private beheading come the sentencing."
Jahara raised an eyebrow.
"You are remarkably well informed of the small civilities afforded the noble classes, Herr Dallas."
The tiefling grinned.
"Well, perhaps such a supposition may have been more Quail's than mine. Besides, they have to find him guilty first,"
reminded Valigar,
"a rare outcome for a noble of this city."
Ari nodded.
"The magistrates are hearing witnesses over next few days. So the Lady Nalia might be in the city,"
confirmed a no-man, knowing from her mood the girl had likely considered the same already as he offered.
"We could seek her out if you wish, Fritha."
Fritha sighed deeply and pillowed her head on her arms.
"No, I don't want to see her."
Another long silence. A no-man felt his patience snap.
"Come along,"
he commanded, on his feet and taking her hand to practically drag her from her chair. Fritha looked furious.
"A no-man, I already said. I do not mean to find the Lady Nalia, we are going out."
Fritha had the suddenly startled look of a cornered animal.
"Out where?" "I haven't decided yet." "A no-man." "No,"
he interrupted, pulling her after him as he made for the door.
"Now, come along."
Herr Dallas threw himself into the nearest chair with a grin.
"You know, I like him better and better."
A no-man's forcefulness did not last long, and the pair had been barely a few paces from the inn when he had apologized for manhandling her so. Fritha had accepted his words, though had refused categorically to continue holding his hand, claiming that the only man who had ever done so had been Gorion, and only then when dragging her to Father Wellen or some other scholar of Candlekeep for a very forced apology. She did, however, concede to take his arm, and they walked like that for a while in silence, a no-man steering them steadily from the slums with little idea of where to go from there.
"I am sorry I have been so ill-tempered lately, a no-man,"
said Fritha suddenly, the man glancing to his side to find her downcast, and he wondered if she had been dwelling on such since they left the inn.
"I just feel like the world is mocking me, that however hard I try I will always fail. But I am not making excuses, I have been taking my temper out on you and I am very sorry for it.
Anomen smiled. She could scream at him twice a day for the next 40 years if it was always followed by such dearly born regret.
Do not fret, Fritha, I do not mind.
Fritha looked both relieved and surprised by his dismissal.
How can you stand there so mildly and say that? I would be livid if someone had been acting so unreasonably to me.
The knight could have almost laughed.
Truly? Perhaps now, though I recall a time when your patience had the abundance of the sea. I had forgotten,
Fritha sighed absently, turning to him to add,
is that why you are being so nice? Some sort of recompense? No, dearest. I understand your frustration and, to be honest, I doubt I could remain angry even if I did not. I just look at you all flushed and scowling and I am filled with love. Ah, you are not still embarrassed about me stating it, are you?
He laughed, as she flushed scarlet.
It has been over a month since I first spoke of it. Yes, and as I recall I was not so pleased to hear it then either,
she muttered sourly. Anomen let his gaze linger on her, wondering how much of her embarrassment was coloring her mood.
Does it displease you as much to hear it now?
Fritha shrugged and went even redder, the girl suddenly very interested in the feet she was scuffing over the cobbles.
I suppose not.
Anomen laughed delightedly, her sullen embarrassment no surer sign of her affections.
You cannot bear it, can you?
She sighed, turning that tired, pained frown upon him.
No, Anomen, it's not that, it's just.
Fritha bit her lip, unsure of how to put the feeling into words. She did care for him, but whatever she felt, she was going to have to leave in the end, and it was hard to invest such emotion to a thing that felt as though it was already over. And then there the last of the coins still to be raised and Hera to worry, for now the druid no longer had the support of the Harpers, and more than anything, she was just grateful he was there to take her mind off it all.
I don't know,
she muttered, knowing, at least, that saying she was grateful for his affections was sure to hurt his feelings. Anomen smiled kindly and squeezed the hand that rested on his arm.
Do not fret, dearest, I am surer of you than you are yourself. Your feelings are sincere enough for me.
Fritha forced a smile, at least, he was happy.
So where are you taking me then?
Anomen laughed.
I have not the faintest idea.
Fritha laughed as well, a few moments' discussion finding them agreed on the goose and grain over in the promenade, and they took a table just as the bells marked the 7th hour of the afternoon. The tavern was quiet, especially for the early evening, only half the tables occupied. Midwinter was the time of year for going straight home to family and hearth, it seemed. Anomen took a mouthful of wine, beginning to feel rather conspicuous and increasingly uncomfortable as the silence between them ticked by without halt. So, began Fritha slowly, as she cast about them,
we're out then? Yes. Do you feel really awkward, or is it just me?
She continued with her characteristic air of unconcerned bluntness.
No, I feel it as well.
Fritha leaned back in her chair and took a long draught of wine, a contemplative frown playing on her brow.
I suppose it can't be helped, it is not as though we are just friends anymore. You taking me out hangs about us with a heavy significance, like a noose.
She added with a morbid grin.
I mean, we usually just fall into being alone together, so it doesn't feel as forced.
Anomen watched her take another contemplative drink, the lamplight bringing out the smooth planes of her face, the dark clever eyes and the lips that never seemed too far from a smile. She glanced back to find him watching, mouth quirking with the promised grin, and he felt suddenly very blessed.
Fritha, why do you think the fates have brought us together?
Because I am a very vain person, and I needed a very particular swain who could take more delight in me than I do myself. Anomen laughed so violently he snorted wine down his tunic, the man still making attempts to mop it up as she asked,
So, why do you think we were brought together?
Because I am so ill-tempered that any other girl would have been driven to a convent by now, he teased, becoming graver as he added,
I know we jest, but I truly do care for you, Fritha. I never doubt it.
He smiled, her tense pleasing him as much as her words.
And so what are we to do with our awkward evening out together?
Fritha continued blithely. Anomen shrugged.
Well, I brought you out with hopes of cheering you, though perhaps I should have taken time to consult with an expert on this matter. What would your errant bard do?
What, Herr Dallas? Fritha confirmed, clearly surprised that Anomen had brought him into the conversation voluntarily.
Well, he'd probably get me really drunk and we'd just be silly and have a laugh, I suppose. Well, we can do that if you wish, do not look at me like that. Like what? Like you do not believe I know how. Well, to be honest, friend, I'm not sure you do.
And the pair of them glanced up to find a familiar blonde head leant over the back of Anomen's chair, his boyish face beaming.
Simon!
Cried Fritha, Anomen already on his feet and shaking their hands as Simon and Eric appeared at their table.
By helm, what are you both doing here? I understood you were both on campaign in the Cloud Peaks. The campaign is over,
Eric explained as they took seats opposite.
Our battalion was the first to be sent back to the city, we arrived but a few hours ago and on a whim we thought to come out for a drink. Who could have anticipated we would meet your fair selves?
Eric glanced to Simon to add solemnly,
We were sorry to hear of your father, Anomen.
But Anomen just shook his head.
It is over. How went the campaign? Very well, we lost few men and the orcs are now driven back into the mountains. We left a few companies of knights back there in the border towns to guard against any further incursions, though most have been recalled to the order. And what a furor we came back to!
Cried Simon, seemingly delighted by the change.
Anomen the talk of the squire's quarters, defying orders and pursuing murderers, and Sir Agentis back from the wind spears with news of dragons. Oh, he is back in the city already?
Confirmed Fritha.
Oh yes, and telling all of his encounter with yourselves and a most malevolent red dragon by the name of Furkrag. Ah, I am so jealous, I have never even seen one outside of the libraries, what was it like?
Fritha shrugged mildly.
Furkrag? Nice, in an evil, manipulative sort of way, and he knew my father, would you believe? In fact, he told me he set fire to him.
Simon and Fritha promptly burst out laughing, the girl recounting the tale of Gorian's folly to the table, clearly enjoying their horror and humor as the story flowed its course. Anomen however was rather stuck on the former of those reactions, the man finally collaring her as Fritha rose to replenish their cups at the bar.
Furkrag told you that story, did he?
He confirmed in an undertone, trying to keep the tense displeasure from his voice as he concluded.
That night of the gathering, when you disappeared for a while.
Fritha's impatient sigh did little to help his temper.
Oh, Anomen. You said you had been in the barn checking on our horse. Anomen. You went back to speak with Furkrag alone, did you not? Helm's mercy, Fritha, he could have killed you. Don't start, Anomen.
She hissed,
if he had wanted me dead, he could have just killed me when we were all there, it's not like we could have stopped him.
Fritha, Anomen sighed, not wanting to argue when the evening had been going so well.
I am not here to scold you, I am just worried, you can be so distant at times.
She could also be very moody, Anomen considered. The pair of them back from the bar, Fritha sat opposite chatting with Simon and still pointedly ignoring him a quarter-hour later. At least she was laughing again, the squire telling her some of the more amusing campaign stories and, seemingly, there had been quite a few.
So, you finally steeled your heart and told her of your regard,
said Eric quietly, adding at Anomen's questioning look,
Irlena told us.
Anomen smiled.
I will be honest, I told Fritha a while ago. She was opposed to it at first, you have heard, I assume, about what she is.
Eric nodded, his face unreadable.
Yes. We heard. And you know Simon,
Eric sighed, smiling as he glanced back to the pair.
The instant he is told and he is lamenting how everyone must judge her so harshly for it, how undeserved a fate for so innocent a girl.
Anomen smiled himself, feeling a sudden swell of affection for his friend, turning back to the paladin to add,
and you, Eric? Anomen, if I had not already met and decided I like her, I know you would not have feelings for her had you any reservations. No, but your opinion means much to me, all the same.
Eric drew a slow breath, looking reluctant to continue, though he did.
I think her everything delightful and worthy, Anomen, but I know what problems such a heritage could bring.
Anomen smiled faintly, idly swirling the wine in his cup.
You sound like her. It took a very long time to convince her I do not care. Well,
Eric sighed, draining the last of his drink and setting the cup down with a certain resolve.
Then I can but support you in the decision. So, have you set a date for the wedding? No, indeed, but ask Fritha that question and see what color she goes. Ask Fritha what?
Came Simon. The pair across the table paused in their talk and watching them intently. Anomen just laughed. They stayed in the tavern until the bar called time, their group parting ways at the western archway of the promenade. Fritha's mood toward him had warmed again within a half hour, and the girl blithely took his arm as they turned to make their way back to the slums.
Yadav, Yadav.
She sighed in some Rashami oath he did not understand, a hand pressed to her temple as she admitted,
I've had far too much to drink, Anomen. I'll be fit for nothing tomorrow. Have you anything so pressing? No, but I don't suppose our next lot of work is going to find itself. But I am resigned to it.
She forestalled as he hastened to make the usual fervent assurances, the girl patting his arm to continue,
we will find something, we always do. Besides, who knows what terrible calamity is just around the corner lying in wait for the good citizens of Athkatla, requiring the skilled arms and avaricious eyes of fine mercenaries like ourselves. I'm glad to see you've the city's best interests at heart,
Anomen quipped mildly.
I will do all I can to save it,
cried Fritha.
I just might require a monetary incentive up front.
Anomen laughed and they spent the rest of the journey discussing what bestial horrors they could unleash upon the city in order to earn their coin. And it seemed no time had passed before they were back in the coronet, voices hushed in that darkened hallway as they made their goodnights. Fritha was stood before him, smiling up at him in slightly wistful way that was making his face hot. Anomen swallowed dryly.
Well, good night, Fritha.
It was not quite a kiss, the girl leaning up to press her cheek against his own, her breath warm and sweet with the scent of wine as she murmured at his ear.
Thank you, Anomen.
And then she was gone, and he was stood alone in the hallway, smiling at the plain wooden face of her door. End of chapter.